Welcome into this week's edition of State of the Program. This week, it's myself, Gerry Hamilton, and CJ Vogel. Bobby Burton's on the plane, flying right now. So we're going to take on State of the Program, the two of us this week. CJ, last night, the college football playoff, latest rankings released, second one of the season. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to look into the Texas-Arkansas game. Where does Texas have advantages? This week, we're going to look at some award winner possibilities for this Texas football team and program. Then we're also at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about National Signing Day. I guess it's not National Signing Day. I don't even know what to call it, CJ, but the early signing period is here. And that means it's a big day on the 40 acres, not football, because that's not until December. But for all other sports, you have gold medalists, you have number one ranked players in the country on the table. I mean, there is a lot going on the 40 acres. So we'll talk about that as well. Before we get to those topics on this week's State of the Program, I'd like to thank Adam Lowy and the Lowy Law Firm for always being the sponsor of the State of the Program. Thank you so much to Adam Lowy for his continued support of On Texas Football and all we do. All right, CJ, let's jump into this. College football playoff rankings released. Texas was number 3. And look, the rankings is one thing because it's so different than the bracket because the rankings itself had 4 Big Ten teams in Texas in the middle at 3. So we're going to bypass that. Let's look at the bracket projection because that's what matters. And the first thing that you see other than, okay, your 4 Power Fours having buys. So right now, ESPN is predicting Texas wins the SEC, BYU, the Big 12, Oregon, the Big 10, and Miami, the ACC. But, CJ, what we see here is 4 Big 10 teams, 4 SEC teams, 1 Big 12, 1 ACC, Notre Dame, independent, and a G5 Boise State. Kind of what are your takeaways when you look at this bracket here, week 2 of the college football projection?
To me, it's all about finding a way to get a bye, and for Texas, again, if you're in the 2 spot right here, you got to feel good, right? Because Indiana and Alabama in this hypothetical or in this projection, that bye week where Texas having to sit out round 1 would be very beneficial to then go on and pick really what I would believe to be your choosing of where to play that quarterfinal game, right? Oregon would head out west, stay out west, probably a Rose Bowl situation that opens up either the Sugar Bowl, Cotton Bowl, wherever it is that you want to pick that second spot. You'd be a home game. Having Alabama or Indiana having to come to you, I think that's very important as well. Also, in this hypothetical, I don't think it's a slam dunk that Texas would be playing Alabama. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Right. But no, it's again, very beneficial. And this, of course, goes on to project that Texas wins the SEC, which if Texas they control their destiny right now. So if you go on and win these next 3 games, you at least have the opportunity to go to Atlanta and play for the SEC championship game. But this is pretty chaotic, Gerry. And the big picture I took away from this is why I was so intrigued and interested with the 12-team playoff. Look at the home games. That would be round 1. Boise State at Ohio State. Notre Dame going to Tennessee and Rocky Top. And then you got Ole Miss traveling up north to Penn State. I'm all for it. I think that's tremendous college football, and it sets up greatly for the sport long term.
Here's where I think this would go because we're this week 2. Let's talk about the end. I think Alabama and Ole Miss are going to go 10-2. They're going to finish this thing off, and they're going to go in the playoffs. Let's just say Notre Dame, before we get to SEC talk, finishes 11-1. Okay, just say because they have to get in the playoff. I actually think Alabama will jump Notre Dame if you can. I don't know if you can. Here's the problem with that. Here's where a 12-team bracket gets interesting. Alabama and Ole Miss are better teams than Notre Dame. But are you going to put Alabama against Tennessee in the first round of playoffs, rivals that have already played this year?
Yeah.
Or are you not? That's where this gets interesting from looking at kind of the rankings released right now because Penn State, Indiana, but would you go Ole Miss, Alabama? Where are they starting to set up that second round game? Because the reality for me is if it doesn't matter if you've already played this year, okay, and you could put 2 SEC teams in the first round, I would think Alabama would jump Notre Dame in a scenario like that if you're really just ranking them. even though Notre Dame would be 11-1, and Indiana and Notre Dame play in the state of Indiana at Bloomington. That would be wild. That would be wild, right? And would set up a potential Texas Notre Dame game in week 2 in the Cotton Bowl. I mean, in Dallas, I mean, crazy. That would be wild. So there's a lot of scenarios. But CJ, let's hit on this SEC scenario real quick, because I think we're getting. If Georgia beats Tennessee this weekend, and with Nico up in the air, he wasn't playing great football anyways, but up in the air, Georgia's the favorite over Tennessee, and they're coming off a loss, and we saw what happens to Georgia when they come off a loss once already, right? If Georgia beats Tennessee, CJ, we're staring down the barrel of five SEC teams probably ended up 10-2.
Right.
So unless Notre Dame loses, somebody's getting left out.
Ooh, to be on this committee, right? Because that's going to be the tough decisions. And of course, you're going to hear it from everybody else in the SEC, the strength of schedules, the top 25 wins. That's going to be the argument against Texas. They wouldn't have a marquee victory if they go 10-2 and they lose to Texas A&M, unless somehow they trip up in Fayetteville and find a way to win later in the year against Texas A&M. But the point being, it muddies the water tremendously for Texas. And it's almost a lose and go home situation. It's almost there for Texas. It's not quite there, right? Because you only have the one loss. But again, you start looking at other resumes, and I don't want to sit there and denounce the Texas strength of schedule entirely, because listen, I don't put a lot of stock in the strength of schedule argument when you're winning every single game by 30. Right. And that's my argument with Indiana. They should probably rank number 4 right now, right behind Texas. They're an undefeated Big Ten school. Again, you look at it, 100th ranked strength of schedule, but they have the 4th highest margin of victory of any team in the country. And that goes Ohio State, Notre Dame. You see them up there. You see Texas. They come in at number 3 at 27.2 points per victory. It's pretty significant to me. So if you're winning every single game as you're supposed to, as a better football team against an inferior team, that to me tells you you're taking care of business, and you're not skating by against Kentucky 13-12. You're not losing to Kentucky at home. There's all sorts of opportunities for teams to slip up throughout the road, but the fact that they're dominating and winning games by a wide margin, that tells me that they're taking care of business the way that they should.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to say at the end of this before we move on to some Arkansas, Texas talk is Miami or SMU is probably going to win the ACC. And I'm not sure I'd bet on Miami to win that game. It'll be in Charlotte, honestly. I'm not sure I'd bet on Miami to win that game. The other interesting thing for me is when you look at this rankings, is there a scenario, CJ, where if Boise wins out, they're not a 12 seed? Could they be seated higher than 12 by this committee? That's one interesting thing to me. I personally don't think so. I know they played Oregon tight, but I mean, Nevada last week, and anybody that watched that game is sat there and said, I don't think Boise could beat South Carolina right now if they played them. I don't think they can handle A&M's defensive front right now if they played them. I'm not sure they could throw the ball. They definitely couldn't handle Ole Miss, right? I mean, but is there a scenario where somebody ranks Boise State higher than 12?
Yeah, I think that's the general assumption, right, is that the GF5 team would just be locked into that 12th spot regardless, right? And to your point, Boise State, you could argue, had played Oregon, the number 1 team in the country, just as tight as Ohio State, if not tighter. And that would be the closest, win for the Ducks on the season. That'd be one of the arguably best losses of anybody on this season as well. But going back to that game, I believe it was 2 special team scores from Oregon that kind of helped them propel them into that victory. So, yeah, you could certainly argue that Boise State, resume-wise, would have a better loss than maybe anybody on this schedule. But I don't know. I don't know what it would take if you're Boise State to jump a Tennessee and Notre Dame and Alabama even, and that's with 2 losses on their schedule versus the Boise State one.
And the reason I bring that up is if down the road, what if Texas is at 11-1 and they're 10-2? What's going to happen with this bracket? But that's the conversation for another day. All right, CJ, there's some things. Let's talk about Texas, Arkansas. Let's talk about where Texas has advantages in the game against Arkansas. So let's leave this here. Rivalry game, on the road, sold out. Arkansas fans would literally give just about anything to beat Texas this year. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Now let's talk about where Texas has advantages in this game. But let's talk about the game when it begins. Where do we see Texas having advantages over Arkansas?
Ooh, you got to start in the passing game. And I say that because the Arkansas secondary has not been great as of late. You know, they sit there. The last home game that they played against Ole Miss, 515 yards, 6 passing touchdowns allowed to Jackson Dart. They're 129th in the country, Gerry, in yards per game allowed through the air. That's 283.9 yards via the passing game. 129th, SEC school, dead last. And so, especially when you look at it recently, because they actually had pretty solid showings defensively against Texas A&M. That was Marcel Reed. And then Tennessee, that was Nico Iamaleava. But they held them under 175 passing yards in each of those games, which means, hey, you know, it's pretty far from the median average, which tells me, one, the Ole Miss game was a heck of a blowout, but also Auburn and Peyton Thorne threw for 285. You look at it.
That's like 500 for somebody else.
Exactly. And Michael Van Buren over at Mississippi State threw for 320. So there are teams with not known for their passing attack that have been able to throw successfully against Arkansas. And for Texas, I had prior to last week, I had 2 opportunities for that offense to find its mojo, to find its rhythm back, right? We knew about Florida and its lack of depth, the injuries that had happened in that secondary that kind of look at Texas and said, all right, if you can't do it here, you have one more opportunity. Well, they did it against Florida. Now you have that opportunity to build and sustain that passing success against an Arkansas secondary. Again, that's not been very good this year. If you can do that, you'll be playing with all sorts of momentum moving forward. And for Quinn, 2 things. He looks really good when he's comfortable and confident. I think Texas will be able to protect the passer if they keep Landon Jackson in check. Yeah, but also that confidence going into the final 2 regular season games is going to be just as important as anything else for Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, and so what we're getting at here, the last 2 games, Arkansas has given up 880 yards passing. That's not a misprint, 880, okay? And that's a massive number. Sam Pittman said in his Monday press conference, he's opened it up for DB competition. That's not a good sign for Arkansas either. That you're in week headed into your big rivalry game, and
not in week 10, Gerry.
Competition at DB here. That means you don't think you have any. I mean, that can guard Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden and Ryan Wingo. That's good for Texas, right? So let's start there. Texas offense, big advantage, speed wise versus the Arkansas secondary, scheme wise versus the Arkansas secondary. Even though they're going to play a lot of 3 high. Ole Miss shredded them, but now here's the difference. Where did Ole Miss shred them? Shred the Arkansas 3 high, CJ. They did it with Jackson Dart throwing deep outside the numbers, not Quinn's strength, and tight end over the middle, which I do think Texas, you know, the pop pass, you saw the pass, the really good read Quinn had against Florida with Gunnar Helm, but it was down the field with the tight end, the backup tight end, who's a good player. And it was outside the numbers vertical against the 3 high. The Watkins kid had 4 or 5 touchdowns, like over 200 yards receiving. Trey Harris didn't even play in that game. So can Texas replicate the way Ole Miss gashed Arkansas is my question.
Yeah, that's going to be the big key, of course, because if Texas is able to do that, listen, it's one thing to see a 3 high again. And that muddies the middle of the field, as we were saying. You know, Quinn coming up against Florida actually had some good throws outside the numbers, right? You look at the touchdown to Matthew Golden, you look at the other pass to DeAndre Moore, which probably should have been caught in the end zone. I think that those were 2 of the better balls that we've seen from Quinn this season. Again, going into that confidence, even if that catch wasn't completed, you know you put it on him. Yep. You know, you're sitting there saying, okay.
Best throw today.
Absolutely. And that's something that we hadn't seen, certainly not against Oklahoma. We didn't see that even attempted against Georgia. Yeah. And before then, I mean, it was kind of sporadic. You know, I thought he had the good plays against Michigan, but where else did you see him really taking the shots? Well, I think a little bit that has to carry over as well. And if it does, and this leads me to my next point, if it does, how does Arkansas keep up with Texas? I don't think they can. And I say that because not because Taylor Green's a bad quarterback, but because, hey, this is a really good Texas defense. They're the number 1 pass defense in all the country, only allowing 135 yards per game. And if you force that Arkansas team to sit back, have to protect its passer, and keep that ball longer in Taylor Green's hand? Well, Gerry, he likes to fumble. Both quarterbacks actually like to fumble. Taylor Green has 11 fumbles on the season. You add Malachi Singleton into that as well. They have 14 total fumbles stemming from just the quarterbacks. And that is also –
it's an amazing number. That's an amazing number.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, okay? The second area where Texas has an advantage. Arkansas offensive line gives up 3.1 sacks a game, 116th in college football. Does that lead to fumbles by quarterbacks? Probably part of it, right? So Taylor Green, you said 11 fumbles, Malachi Singleton 3, so 14 fumbles. They have the most fumbles per game in the NCAA this year. 2.5 a game. That doesn't mean fumbles lost. It's fumbles on the ground. 110th in turnovers. That is surrendered. I mean, so in Texas, like you said, leads the SEC in interceptions. So that is the interesting part to me. And you can't watch the Ole Miss game and say, oh, Texas can do that. Because Ole Miss's defensive front's really good. They did an amazing NIL build of their defensive line. But you could watch Arkansas's right tackle struggle against some really good pass rush teams. Say, well, Colin Simmons could probably have a big day against this guy.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the key for Arkansas to me is, can they withstand even a more simplistic, as Sam Pittman said, defensive scheme from Texas, but still has edge rush pass ability with Colin Simmons, with Ethan Burke, with Barron Sorrell, with Trey Moore, and with Anthony Hill screaming off the edge or from a B gap from time to time, right? Can Arkansas handle that? Because if they can't, that's probably going to lead to more turnovers by the quarterbacks.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say 116th. Is that what they were ranking in sacks per game, Gerry? That's the third worst. It's crazy to even say that there are two other SEC teams worse than 116th in pass protection this year, but that's the third worst in the conference right now. The two others that have margins worse than Arkansas, Mississippi State and Oklahoma. Texas played both of them, and they get counted for 11 sacks out of those two games. So that kind of gives you an idea of how successful the Longhorns were, especially should Texas get up early, right? They probably could have and should have had more sacks against Mississippi State, but that game was 14-6 at halftime, and it was very close. Mississippi State was able to hand the rock off, control the time. That's something Texas cannot allow Arkansas to continue to play, is that running style with Braylon Russell, with Jaquindon Jackson and Taylor Green using their legs. Force them to sit back and pass and catch up, and you let those pass rushers get after them.
And also Taylor Green, 11 fumbles, 7 interceptions. Not an accurate quarterback. He can run really hot and cold. If you take away Armstrong for an extended period of time, they struggle in the passing game. So that will be interesting as well. So Texas has, we feel like, has some clear advantages. They're a 14-point favorite for a reason. They have an advantage with the Texas pass rush against Arkansas. Arkansas is not a good pass protection team. Obviously, the key to that is stopping the run and getting them in predictable situations. And then Arkansas's pass defense is a real Achilles heel for them this season and has been exploited by both good passing teams in Ole Miss and Auburn, 285. That's a big number for Auburn, right? That's a big number for Auburn. All right, CJ, let's move on now to we're getting to the point where there's a lot of semifinalists being named for the awards around college football. So I'll let you go through some of those right now because we have some Texas players up for many awards. And here's the key with the semifinalist awards, before CJ gets into who they are. Like a Davey O'Brien award, we're down to 16, right? A Maxwell award, we're about down to 16. A Bednarik award, we're down to 20. The Joe Moore award, we're down to 10. Thorpe award, we're down to like 10, 12 as well. So it's not like when they say semifinalists, we're not talking about two guys for an award at this point in time. But this is how they kind of go from 50 to 10 or whatever their working number is, and then get into the finalists and then the eventual award.
Yeah, so 7 Longhorns received semifinalist tags on 6 awards. So 2 of them doubled up, might be fighting each other for that award. We'll go through them here. We'll start at quarterback. Quinn Ewers named a semifinalist for the Maxwell Award. Gunnar Helm, the Mackey Award for top tight end in the country as well. No surprise there. We'll see if he's actually named a finalist. We'll go through that here in a bit. Gerry, I'll get your thoughts coming up, but the offensive line named a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award. Bednarik Award, that goes to the best defensive player in the country. Texas actually had Jahdae Barron and Anthony Hill named semifinalists for that award. Thorpe Award, that is going to the best defensive back in the country. That's Jahdae Barron. And then the Burlsworth Award, that goes to the best walk-on of the season, someone who started their career as a walk-on. That award right now has Michael Taft listed as a semifinalist. And, hey, he's got a pretty solid shot.
I think Michael Taft's got a really good shot at that award. I mean, like, legit, he may have the best shot at that award of any of the guys that are up for an award, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Maxwell and Davey O'Brien. I mean, Dylan Gabriel, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milrose, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Moore, Diego Pavi. I mean, Quinn's not going to win either one of those awards. It'll be interesting to see if he makes the finalist for one of those awards. Thorpe Award, Jahdae Barron, Travis Hunter, Nick Emanumori, the safety from South Carolina, is an absolute stud. It's going to be a great pro. Takario Davis, Caleb Downs, Malachi Starks, Jalen Catalon, right? Oh, if he's healthy and he's playing for Barry Odom, he's going to put up stats. That's one thing we know about Jalen Catalon. Barron's got a legit shot there, depending on what happens with Travis Hunter. Joe Moore Award, CJ's interested, because I want to read the names of the Joe Moore Award off, because it's nowhere near what we thought it would be to start the season. Joe Moore Award, semifinalist. Alabama, Indiana, Iowa, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Tulane, Tennessee, Oregon, Army, and Texas. LSU's not on that list.
That is surprising. But I guess, listen, that's the thing.
It's not on that list.
You watch LSU, Jerry. They got 2 tackles and they got a turnstile on the interior.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what we've said, okay, Texas struggled, obviously, a couple of games in pass protection, not just on the OL. But the fact that Texas is still standing on this and a couple other SECs aren't is kind of interesting and telling, which tells you if Texas has a really good game against A&M and they go 11-1, they might actually really have a shot to win an award we didn't think they would after the Georgia game.
Yeah, no kidding. I had all but written the Texas Longhorns off for the offensive line, the Joe Moore Award, after that Georgia game. And I'm looking at it right now. The Pro Football Focus pass blocking efficiency in all of the country, Texas ranks number 3 with a 93.6% efficiency rating. That's only behind Kansas and Oklahoma State, who Oklahoma State hasn't won a conference game in the Big 12, yet somehow has a really good pass blocking offensive line. To my point, the numbers will still favor the Longhorns long term, because they had a great start to the season. They had a great showing in Michigan against a really, really good defensive line front. They took a big step back against Georgia. I thought that they played well enough against Oklahoma to keep Quinn upright. But what can they do with their next and probably last test against Texas A&M? That's going to be really important, of course, because, listen, we've talked about it before. Texas has had 3 guys already named some sort of SEC offensive lineman of the year. That was Jake Majors. Kelvin Banks has done it multiple times. Cam Williams did it very early in the season as well. Those individual awards will continue to stack up, and that helps the Texas Longhorns say, hey, yeah, we got a pretty good resume right now of guys who have won individual awards and offensive line that's come to play each and every week, with the exception of Georgia.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with these awards as we get down to the finalists. I feel like Michael Taft's got a really good shot. I feel like Jahdae Barron will be a Thorpe Award finalist. Quarterback, I don't think we'll have a finalist. Joe Moore Award finalist, I could see Texas being a finalist there. We'll see what happens. I could see Gunnar Helm being a finalist for the match.
What's the path, Jerry, in your eye for a Bednarik Award? Maybe for, does Anthony Hill have a campaign? He has 11 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, playing middle of the field, got an interception as well. What's next? Is it just stat accumulation for him?
It's going to be interesting how that's looked at, right? I mean, he's a sophomore. Jahad Campbell's a junior. He's a phenomenal player for Alabama. Jalen Walker at Georgia. So where is he going to stack up versus the older players for that award? You feel like it's a year away, but statistically it's not a year away, but you feel like it's probably a year away for Anthony Hill, and where he's going to stack up with some of those other linebackers within his own conference is my question.
Yeah, good point. No, but certainly it's fun to be in this conversation. Again, I just listed off 7 Longhorns that are out for semifinalists of award. It was fun last year when Tavondre Sweat won some hardware and brought it back for the Texas Longhorns. Now you got 6, 7 other different opportunities for guys to be named finalists, go to the award ceremony, and represent the university, because that's what recruits look at as well, is can you develop into the best
100%.
at your position in the entire country?
100%. Being up for these awards is huge in recruiting, right? I mean, it's everybody wants a trophy case. I mean, you want, and that's what matters in recruiting. Player development, that's player development. That's draft pick status. That's all those things. And you're doing it in the SEC. That's the other thing. You're up for awards in the SEC. Texas first, second, third team in the SEC. All SEC teams will be littered with Texas players. Not littered, but there'll be a few.
Yeah.
It's a great conference. There's a lot of great players, but all this matters in recruiting. Speaking of recruiting, I do, before we get to that, to close out the show this week, I want to thank Adam Lowy again, the sponsor of the State of the Program Weekly. Injured, give Adam Lowy a call in the Lowy Law Firm. Over 20 years of experience helping injured Texans. Adam Lowy, he is the guy to call. Call Adam Lowy if you're injured. And thank you again, Adam Lowy, for being a great sponsor of On Texas Football. All right, let's close out with this, CJ. It's the early signing period begins on Wednesday, November 13th today. And that doesn't involve Texas football, but that involves every other sport at Texas. I mean, there's some big basketball is going to sign John Clark, right? A top 40, top 35, top 40 player in America. Women's basketball is going to sign Aaliyah Crump, right? A top 15 player in the country. You have swimming, who's going to probably sign multiple future medalists, right? And the Olympic medalists and all the other sports. But a huge day on the 40 without being football, specific here for the early signing period.
The first one I wanted to mention, Gerry, is Chris Giuliano, swimmer. How about that? You know, he's a 2-time Olympic medalist, transferring in from Notre Dame. Listen, we all know about how successful Texas has been, even with the transition of Bob Bowman. That's a big one right there. And then even beyond that, Aaliyah Crump signing the number 5 overall basketball player in the country, already signed Wednesday morning to Vic Schaefer and his program. Very important. And that goes back to those big recruiting visits, right? You know, and that goes to the Georgia game, the Mississippi State game, those big recruiting events on campus that Texas is able to showcase the entire university, the spectacle of playing under the lights and the drones, the environment, the stadium, the campus, everything. That helps, and that trickles down to every single sport. I believe our Blake Monroe expected 16 signees as well coming to the baseball program. The first signing day for Jim Schlossnagel and his staff. So it trickles down everywhere. And right now, Texas, when it wins on the football field, that trickles down to just about everywhere else with the buzz, the excitement. And Texas certainly reaping the rewards, hoping to get back to a Director's Cup status later on this cycle.
And like women's soccer, Coach Kelly wins the first ever SEC trophy for Texas. She has Lexi Missimo, one of the best players in Texas history. That stuff continues to build, and you bring in more top talent to the University of Texas. So while it's not football today, it's a huge couple of 3 days starting today on the 40 acres for University of Texas athletics, because the next wave of all Americans, all SEC players, Olympic medalists, pro athletes, prospects and players that are going to help Texas move towards another couple of Directors' Cups, like CJ said, they're all going to sign this week at the University of Texas, a lot of them. So we'll keep you up to date on that on ontexasfootball.com. We have that, plus recruiting news, everything you need. For CJ Vogel, I'm Gerry Hamilton. Thank you very much for joining us on the State of the Program today. Again, Bobby Burton on a plane, traveling today. He'll be back with CJ and I next week. Thank you very much. Have a great week, and hook 'em.